Others headed to their dormitory hall, where a cold midday repast awaited the students. Nyx hurried in the other direction. She had no appetite. Instead, she reached one of the 4 staircases that led down from the 7th tier to the one below, where the 6th years were likely already eating in their own hall. Through the wood, through the world around her was only shadows. Against the brightness, she did not slow. Even without her cane, she moved swiftly. She had lived half of her life in the walled cloistery. By now, she knew every nook and crook of its tiers. The number of steps, turns, and stairs had been ingrained into her, allowing her to traverse the school with relative ease. At the edge of her full awareness, a silent count ran in the back of her skull. She instinctively reached out a hand every now and then to a carved lintel, to a wooden post of a stall, to a stone flogging pillar, continually confirming her location and position. As she descended through the tiers, she pictured the breadth of the cloistery of Briac. It rose like a steeped hill from the swamps of Myr, and its base, the school stretched over a mile across, built atop a foundation of volcanic stone, one of the rare, solid places amongst these watery marshlands and drowned forests. The school was the 2nd oldest in the kingdom of Halendi, the oldest being on the outskirts of its capital, Azantia, but the cloistery was still considered the harshest and the most esteemed due to its isolation. Students spent their entire 9 years in Briac, beginning at the lowermost tier, where the young first years were instructed. From there, classes were winnowed smaller and smaller to match the ever-shrinking tiers of the school. Those that failed to rise were sent back to their families in shame. But that did not stop students from arriving here by boats, ships from all around the crown. For those who succeeded in reaching the 9th tier at the school's pinnacle, they were destined for honor and prominence, advancing either to the handful of alchemical academies, where they'd be instructed in the deeper mysteries of the world, or into one of the religious orders to be ordained into the highest devotions. When Nyx reached the 3rd tier, she glanced back to the summit of the school. Twin fires glowed amidst the shadows at the top, bright enough for even her clouded eyes to discern. One pyre smoked with alchemical mysteries, the other burned with the clouds of sacred incense. It was said that the shape and fires of the cloistery mimicked the volcanic peak at the heart of Myr, the steam-shrouded mountain of the Fist. In addition, the infused smoke rising from the top of the school served to keep the denizens of those cave-pocketed slopes, the winged bats, from approaching too close. Still, in the gloom of winter, dark wings occasionally shredded through the low clouds, screeches would send first and second years cowering and crying for reassurance from their sisters and brothers, who taught them, until eventually one grew to ignore the threat. Nyx could not say the same was true for her. Even at her age, the hunting cries would set her heart pounding, her head to burning. And when she was younger, a first year new to the school, terror would overwhelm her, sending her into a dead faint. But she had nothing to fear now. It was the middle of the summer, and whether from the brightness or the heat, the massive bats kept away from the swamp's edges, sticking close to their dark dens in the fist. By the time she finally reached the lowermost tier of the cloistery, her shame and embarrassment had waned to a dull ache in her chest. She rubbed her bruised elbow, a reminder that there would still be repercussions to come. Until then, she wanted reassurance and aimed for the only place she could find it. She headed out through the school gates and into the trading post of Braic. The ramshackle village hugged the walls of the cloistery. Braic fed, supplied, and maintained the school. Goods were carted upward every morning, accompanied by lines of men and women who served as chambermaids, servitors, sculleries, and cooks. Nyx had thought this to be her own fate, having started at the school as a house girl at the age of 6. Once out into the village, she moved just as sure-footed. She not only counted her footsteps through the crooked streets, but her ears pricked to the rhythmic hammering of Smithy's row to her left. The steady ringing helped guide her path. Tink, tink, tink. Her nose also lifted to the pungent smoke and heady spices of the markets, where fishes and eels were already frying under the midday sun. Even her skin noted the thickening air and growing dampness as she reached Braic's outskirts. Here, the stone and plaster palacios, closer to the school's walls, declined to more modest homes and storehouses with wooden walls and thatched roofs. Still, she continued onward until a new smell filled her world. It was the heavy broom of sodden hair, sweet shite, trampled mud, and sulphurous belch. She felt her fears shedding from her shoulders as she drew nearer, enveloping herself in the rich odors. It meant home. Her arrival did not go unnoticed. A rumbling bellow greeted her, followed by another and another. Splashing headed her way. She crossed forward until her hands found the stacked stone fence that marked off the bullock pens at the swamp's edge. A heavy shuffle aimed toward her, accompanied by a softer grunting and a few plaintive bleats, as if the great lumbering beast thought themselves to blame for her long absence. She lifted a hand until a wet nose, covered in phlegm, settled on her palm. Her fingers were nosed up and gently nuzzled. From the size and shape, she knew this snout as readily as she did the village and the school. "It's good to see you, too, Gramblebuck." She freed her hand and reached up, she dug her fingers through the thick, matted fur between the stubby horns until her nails found skin. She scratched him hard where he always liked it, earning a contented huff of hot air against her chest. Gramblebuck was the eldest of the herd, nearly a century old. He rarely pulled the sledges through the rushes and the marshes any longer, but he remained lord of the bullocks. Most of the shaggy herd here could trace their blood to this one beast. She reached up, and both arms gripped his horns. Even with his head bowed low, she had to lift her toes to get hold. She pulled his head to hers, his crown as wide as her chest. She inhaled his wet musk, leaned into the warmth, hearth of his bulk. "I missed you too," she whispered. He grunted back and tried to haul her up by arching his short neck. She laughed and let go of his horns before she was carried aloft. "I don't have time to go for a ride with you. Maybe on my midsummer's break?" Though Gramblebuck no longer pulled the sledges, he still loved to trek through the swamps. All her life, she had spent many long days on his wide back, traversing the marshes. His long legs and splayed hooves made easy passage through the bogs and its streams, while his size and curled tusks discouraged any predators from daring to approach. She patted his cheek. "Soon, I promise you," as she headed down to the fence row, running her fingertips along the posts. She hoped it was a promise she could keep. Other bullocks shuffled and slided up, wanting attention too. She knew most of them by touch and smell, but her time was limited. The bells would soon be summoning her back to her studies. She hurried towards the corner of the 100-acre bullock pen, where a homestead stood. Its foundation was anchored to the stone shore, but also stretched out atop a massive dock, which extended a quarter league into the swamps. The home's walls were stacked stones, matching the fence, its roof thatched like the homes nearby. Higher up, a rock chimney pointed out at the skies, where the shadows of low clouds scudded across the brightness, rolling ever eastward, carrying the freezing cold of the dark towards the searing scorch on the other side of the world. She crossed to the stout door, lifted the iron hatch, and shoved inside without a knock or a shout. As she stepped in to the deeper shadows, her world shrank, but not in a disconcerting way. It was like being wrapped in a warmth of a familiar blanket. She was immediately struck by the melange of odors that meant home, the smell of old wood, the oily polish of wood, the smoke of dying coals, the melting beeswax from the tiny candles in the home's corner altar, the smell of old wool, even the waft of composting silage from the twin stone silos that flanked the docks pervaded everything. Her ears peaked to a shuffle of limbs and a creak of wood. Nearby, a ruddy glow of the hearth. A voice, wry with amusement, rose from there. "Trouble again, is it?" Herda asked. "Is there any other reason you tumbled back home nowadays, lass? And without your cane?" She hung her head, staring down at her empty hands. She wanted to dismiss his words, but could not. A gentle laugh softened his judgment. "Go and sit and tell me about it." With her back to the fire, Nyx finished her litany of the morning's humiliations and fears. It lightened her spirit, simply to unburden them. All the while, her da sat silently, puffing on a pipe, smoldering with snake root. The tincture in the smoke helped, with the crick and rasp of his joints, but she suspected his silence was less about tempering any pain than it was to allow her time to fill the quiet with her complaints. She let out a sigh to announce the ending. Her da sucked on the pipe and exhaled one long, bitter breath of smoke. Let me ken it better for you. You certainly tweaked the nose of none who taught you this last quarter. Nyx rubbed the bruise from Sister Reed's bony fingers and nodded. But you also impressed yourself upon the prioress of the entire school. Not a small feat, I imagine. She was being kindly at best, and I don't think my clumsiness helped the situation, especially breaking the school's treasured orrery. No matter, what is broken can always be set aright. On the balance of it, I'd say you fared well for one morning. You'll finish your 7th year and another turn of the moon, leaving only the 8th year to go until the final culling to the 9th and highest tier. It seems, under such circumstances, earning the good graces of the prioress herself versus irking a single nun, a sister who you'll soon leave behind. Anyway, it's not a bad trade. His words helped further temper her misgivings. Maybe he was right. She had certainly endured far harsher obstacles to reach the 7th tier, and now I'm so close to the top. She shoved down that hope, deep down, fearing, even wishing it, might dash her chances. As if reading her thoughts, her da underscored her luck. Look, where you started, a babe of 6 moons mewling atop a floating raft of fenweed. If not for your belly aching, we wouldn't heard ya. Gramblebuck would have dragged my sledge right past ya. She attempted to smile. The story of her being found abandoned in the bog was a point of joy to her da. He had 2 strong sons, both in their 3rd decade now, who managed the paddocks, ran the sledges, but the man's wife had died, giving birth to his only daughter, losing both at the same time. He took Nyx's discovery in the swamps as some gift from her mother, especially as there was no evidence of who left the infant naked, crying in the bog. The spread of fenweed, a fragile, temperamental plant, exhibited no evidence of any treadfall around her body. Even the tender blooms that covered the floating mat's surface showed no bruise to their petals. It was as if she had been dropped from the skies as a reward for the devout and hard-working swamper. Still, while this oft-told story was a point of pride for her da, for her it was laced with an uncomfortable mix of shame and anger. Her mother, maybe both her parents, had abandoned her in the swamps, surely left her to die, perhaps because she had born afflicted. The surfaces of her eyes glazed a bluish white. How I loved you, her da said, admitting another truth. Even if you hadn't been picked to join the first years of the cloistery, though my heart was just about to burst when I heard you pass the test. It was an accident, she muttered. He coughed at a cloud of smoke. Don't say that. Nothing in life is simple chance. It was a sign. The mother still smiles on you. Nix didn't believe it as devoutly as him, but she knew better than to contradict him. At the time, she had been a house girl at the school, assigned to washing and scrubbing. She had been mopping one of the testing wards when she tripped over a tumble of small books, some stone, others wooden, on the floor. Small blocks, pardon me. Fearing they might be important, she gathered them up and set them atop a nearby table. But curiosity got the better of her. While neatly stacking them, she felt how different shapes fit against one another. It was how she experienced much of the world around her, then and now, through the sensitivity of her fingers. With no one around, she began fiddling with the blocks and lost track of time, but eventually the 9 score shapes built themselves into an intricate structure, with crenellated towers and jagged walls that formed a 6-pointed star around the castle center. Lost in her labors and concentrating fully on her work, she had failed to notice the gathering around her. Only when done did she straighten, earning gasps from her hidden audience. She remembered one known asking another, how long had she been here? The answer, I left when she came in with a mop and pail. That was less than 1 ring ago. She built the high mount of Azantia in such a short time? We give the aspirants an entire day to do the same, and most fail. I swear. Someone had then grabbed her chin, turned her face, and look at the blue cast to her eyes. She's all but blind. It was the summoning bell. She had to be in her latter-day studies before they ran again. She did not have much time. Her da heard it too. Best you get going, lass. She gained her feet by the hearth and reached to his hand, feeling the wiry muscles under the skin, all wrapped around strong bones. She leaned in and kissed him, finding his whiskered cheek as surely as a bee to a honeyclot. I'll see you again when I can, she promised him, remembering she had sworn the same to Gramblebuck. She intended to keep that promise to both. Be good, her da said, and remember, Mother is always looking out for you. As she headed towards the door, she smiled at her da's undying faith, and both her and the mother below, she prayed it was not misplaced, not with either of them. And that marks